first. This is Alex O'Donnell from Griffith University. He's a final year PhD student, and he's just mentioned that if anyone's looking for a postdoc, he is your man. So he's available to any interested parties. Thank you very much, Alex.
Hello, and thank you for having me here today. As I was introduced, my name is Alex, and I'm really going to talk about some of the work that I've been doing in collaboration with some of my PhD supervisors. And basically, to give you some background for my project, what I did was I started my PhD, and I wanted to do something cool, novel, interesting, and big. So I wanted to use a new form of technology to sort of advance our indirect contact strategies. But beyond that, I actually wanted a sort of basic justification for why we should actually continue to develop these formats when we already have highly effective ones available to us. So generally, what I'm talking about today is this overall challenge behind people not willing to engage in face-to-face contact. We know that contact works, but yet some people choose not to do it simply because they don't want to or because they're actively avoiding the outgroup. Now, there's a general argument put forward by many people, including people sitting here today, that the solution to that is indirect contact, which, as defined here, is a form of interaction or exposure to an outgroup member without them physically being present in front of you. Now, that brings me to my question, and that is, does indirect contact actually overcome this idea of segregation? And the way that I'm doing that is by applying it to my new form of contact that I'm trying to develop, which utilizes virtual reality technology. To put my work in context, basically I see there being two key mechanisms or reasons why you would engage in indirect contact. The first being that you decide to do it. I'm an individual, I have free will over myself, and so I'm going to be exposed to someone or talk to someone in an indirect way. The second option is that an institution can force you to do it. You're a school student, you do what you're told, the teacher tells you what to do, and today you're doing a lesson which involves imagining an outgroup member. So primarily what I'm doing is I'm talking about contact that's selected by the individual. So as depicted here, an individual can choose to do any number of things, and obviously given the reference to virtual reality, I'm talking about these really technology-mediated contacts, or that's what I'm focusing on. So basically, technology-mediated or computer-mediated or electronic contact and so on and so forth is a really promising avenue as put forward by others due to the increased connectivity that we find ourselves with using technological devices. And basically, there's an emerging and growing evidence that these forms of contact can improve intergroup relations, but also advance people towards face-to-face contact. This brings us back to a sort of broader position in the indirect contact field, in that people can eventually develop their way along this continuum towards a direct interaction. But I'm not entirely sure that people would actually do that unprompted, or more specifically, I'm not entirely sure that people that would avoid a outgroup member in a direct fashion would immediately select into an indirect way. And so I drew upon the medical science literature and came across these ideas of acceptability studies. Now, as noted here in the British Journal of Medical Research, acceptance is not a sufficient component of an intervention's success, but it is a necessary one. The most effective interventions will have their effects rendered useless if people don't actually sign up and then conform with the requirements associated with the intervention. So I wanted to apply this sort of thinking towards the virtual reality contact, which I've defined here as essentially the viewing of or interaction with someone in a virtual environment. And I think the key point to take away from this definition is that it has to mimic the real world. So essentially, the development of VR content takes time, it takes energy, and it takes money. So I want to know, would people actually want to do this? And in particular, would people that would benefit from this form of contact actually want to do it? And I've sort of conceptualized that as being people high in intergroup anxiety, because of course it's been demonstrated hundreds of times, a key predictor of avoidance is of course anxiety. So I collected data from an Australian undergraduate sample. I then replicated it with an American MTurk sample. And I collected data on their level of intergroup anxiety. And in particular, I asked them questions about how willing they would be to do a range of activities, either with someone face-to-face or virtually with a head-mounted display. These items were included in a big, broad list of things, and I just have an example here. Now, I expected that more people would be willing to engage in virtual reality contact. It's interesting, it's novel, and it's cool, of course. What I found was that on average, people were actually more willing to engage in face-to-face contact. Note the small effect sizes, but they were both significant in both samples. Another thing to take away is that they're actually all around the sort of midpoint of the scale, which was somewhat willing, which the thing that I've taken away from that is essentially they're indifferent. I may do it, I may not, I don't really mind. Then what I wanted to see was I wanted to see the way that intergroup anxiety would predict willingness to approach either of these forms of contact. And I controlled for other elements that could potentially influence people's decision to use technology or engage in face-to-face interactions, as you can see here with technological enjoyment and communication apprehension. As expected and replicated, intergroup anxiety predict lower willingness to engage in face-to-face contact in both samples. Intergroup anxiety also predicted lower willingness to engage in virtual reality intergroup contact in both samples. So then what I did was I went ahead and I did a Wald's test of parameter equality. And what that test revealed to me was that the link between anxiety and lower face-to-face contact was significantly stronger than the link between anxiety and willingness to engage in VR contact. So the way that I've conceptualized these results is that intergroup anxiety is a deterrent for engaging in indirect contact, full stop, but it may be a significantly less deterrent towards more indirect forms of contact. So what are the implications of this? The first is that highly anxious people may find technologically mediated contact less confronting, and therefore, as stated in my thesis for continuity, they provided a strong imperative to develop this virtual reality contact. But also it's preliminary evidence that using this individual form of contact, that perhaps face-to-face contact is the preferred choice, and that better methodologies and more varied forms of research should be used to evaluate this further. Thank you.
That is, it's not really a question, but maybe a thinky comment. Should we maybe classify not having outgroup friends as a medical condition? Because it seems that way. You are approaching it from a perspective, we produce a tool that helps us to address this target group of people who have difficulties approaching something in reality, like some people with spider-phobia or who are afraid of heights. So I said it's a stinky question or a stinky comment.
Yes, and of course the work that I'm presenting here in terms of the VRIC, I sort of got my inspiration from that, from virtual reality exposure therapy. And there's a big long literature suggesting that people that won't engage with their phobic stimuli in clinical settings will engage with them using VR. And I understand that there's this sort of issue with pathologizing racism in some way. And I've had conversations about this in the past with different people. The answer that I tend to give is I'm not necessarily wanting to blame someone for being prejudicial. I'm not in any way actually suggesting that they're defunct or needs fixing. But what I do think that we as a society and we as agents of change need to provide them with mechanisms that can lead them to living a more successful life. You cannot live a successful life in a modern day country such as Australia, where multiculturalism is rampant, without actually engaging with these people in a comfortable manner. So it's not necessarily just saying, oh, well, you don't have friends, so therefore, you know, there's a problem with you. But what it is suggesting is that you need to be able to interact with these people to succeed. If you're a business person and you have an Asian client come along, you need to be comfortable in order to do your job proficiently. So I hope that answers your question statement. Cool.
move on to our next speaker.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Alex.